Okay, so I'm so glad you're here today. You being here just shows that you value scripture and you want to learn from it to help incorporate it into your everyday life. So I think that's a great thing to be working on and a great thing to do. So welcome, I'm glad you're here today. Most of you know my name is Sara Slaybaugh, and I am running a online coaching business for divorced Christian women, helping them to learn how to find a loving and supportive relationship. So today I want to talk about the Book of Ruth. It's a very exciting book. It's a very short book if you just want to read it quickly. It's only 4 chapters, but it has a ton of wisdom from God in it. It has a ton of things that we can learn from it and apply to our lives. So it's a really actually fun book to read, and you'll get a lot of stuff from it. So I want to kind of give you an overview of the Book of Ruth, what's going on in the Book of Ruth. If you've never read it before or you're not familiar with it, hopefully this will give you kind of like an easy condensed version of what's going on. So the Book of Ruth is in the Old Testament. It's very early on in your Bible. It's more than 1,000 years before Jesus was born. So that's kind of the time frame that we're at in this book. So it starts out with this woman, Naomi. Naomi was an Israelite. She was married to a man named Elimelech, and they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. You don't have to remember all of those names. We're mostly going to focus on Naomi in this part. So in Israel at this time, in Judah where they were living, there was a famine. And so Elimelech decided to take his family to the country of Moab to wait out the famine and to see if maybe they could find food and everything that they needed there. So they go to Moab. This is actually a significant part of the story because the Israelites and the Moabites were not friends. They were basically enemies, to the point where the Moabites had refused to help Israel. They had even hired somebody to curse Israel. It was really not a good situation between the two groups of people. So nevertheless, Naomi and her family go to Moab to wait out the famine. So while they're in Moab, it explains to us that their 2 sons get married to the Moabite women. This is also significant because the Israelites were not supposed to do that. Another thing with the Moabites was that they were worshiping foreign gods, they were worshiping idols, they were doing a lot of practices that were against the Israelite tradition and against God. And so they weren't supposed to marry the Moabite women, but the 2 sons married the Moabite women. One of them was named Ruth, which is, the title of our book, and the other one's name was Orpah. So what happens while they're in Moab is that all 3 of the men die. So Naomi's husband Elimelech dies, and Ruth and Orpah's husbands die. So Naomi is left with the 2 daughters-in-law. There were no other sons to carry on the family name, and so she's left with Ruth and Orpah. This is also significant because back then, if you were a single woman, unless you were very well off somehow on your own, but generally, if you were a single woman or if you were a widow, you didn't have provision. That you didn't have direct provision coming to you. And so they were kind of again in a drastic situation. So Naomi hears that the famine is over, and so they leave and they wind up returning to the land of Judah. And she talks to her 2 daughter-in-laws, and she kind of tells them, like, I want what's best for you. I really love and adore you both. I cherish you. If you continue on with me, I have nothing to offer you. Basically, I don't have any more sons that you can marry. And so she wants them really to be able to live their lives and have full lives and be able to have children because they had not yet had children. And so she tells them to go back to their homeland. Neither of the daughter-in-laws want to do that. They really plead with Naomi, and it just shows that they had a really good relationship with her and some trust and love. So they at first decide, no, they don't want to leave Naomi. And then Naomi again kind of pleads with them a little bit that she wants what's best for them. And so the one daughter-in-law, Orpah, does decide to go back to her people. But Ruth says, no, I'm going to stay with you. And Ruth says that I'm going to go where you go, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Lots of you have heard that verse. It's a famous phrase in scripture, and it comes from Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. Ruth says that. It's also significant here because Ruth actually uses the Lord's name, Lord in all capital letters, which means Yahweh, which I talked about in my video, the #1 scripture that got me through my divorce in the season afterwards. So watch that video if you're unclear about what that name actually means. So Yahweh, or the name Lord in all capital letters. I have a video that discusses that a little bit, but it's significant here because Ruth decides that she's not going to go back to her Moabite people. She's not going to go back to the Moabite culture. She's not going to go back to her family members that are there, and her friends, and her house, and everything that she had there. And she's declaring that, no, I'm with you, Naomi. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be with you. Which means that she's also going to have to help Naomi. And she says that the Lord will be her God, which shows that she believed in the one true God. So Ruth decides that she's going to go back, and so Naomi says okay, and they go back. They wind up coming to the town of Bethlehem, which is significant later because we know that Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem. So they wind up going back to the town of Bethlehem. And they get there right at the time of the barley harvest, which is also significant. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They come there where there is a time of more abundant food, which is what they needed, which is what they were searching for. So they get there, and Ruth goes out and she starts gleaning in the field. So what this means is there was Israelite law that said that whenever you harvested your fields, you weren't allowed to actually harvest up until the very edge of the field. You had to leave some of what was on the edge of the field for the people that would come, the poor people, the sojourners, which means travelers, people that didn't really have a place to stay, the widows, the fatherless. So God had a provision for those people. That the owners of the land, the farmers, they were not supposed to harvest right up to the edge of their field. They were supposed to leave that for those people. So Ruth goes out into a field and she starts gleaning, which is what that was called, and she's picking up kind of what is left over. So she's kind of going behind the reapers or the harvesters, and they're gathering their crop, and they're not getting everything, so they're leaving some things, and she's going behind them with some other women, and they're gathering what they can gather, because likely they don't have a husband in that time and age. Your husband was definitely your provider, and so they had to go out on their own, and they had to just pick up what was left over, basically. So she's out in the field doing that, and along comes a man named Boaz, who is the owner of the field, and it says that she happened to be in his field, but you can tell by reading the whole book of Ruth that really it's God's orchestration, that God had brought her to that particular field. Out of all the fields, that he had brought her to that area. And so Boaz comes onto the scene. It's important to note, which we'll also talk about a little bit later, that Boaz's mother was Rahab the prostitute. So we have somebody in scripture that has, a former past of maybe not the best things, and we see how it was turned around and God used it for good and God redeemed it. So Boaz comes on the scene. He owns the field. He is a wealthy man, and he takes note that there's a new woman there. And so he asks his workers there, who is she? And they tell him who she is. And they also make note to say she's been working very hard. Like, she actually is doing a good job for herself and for Naomi. And so Boaz then talks to her, which is another thing he didn't have to do. He's a man in that society. He's the owner of a field. He didn't need to talk to the women that were, gathering the least of the least in the back. But he talks to her. He's very kind. He's very respectful. And he actually tells her that he already knows of her reputation, that he knows that she treated Naomi very well, that he had heard that, Ruth decided to stay with Naomi, which meant that she was going to help be responsible for Naomi's well-being, that she was going to be helping her for her provision, that she helped her, of course, on the long journey that they would have had to make to get to Bethlehem in the first place. And so Boaz starts by basically being very kind and respectful and telling Ruth that he's already familiar with her, and he has a good opinion of her based on her reputation, based on what he has heard about her. This is also another significant part of the story, because remember, we talked about at the beginning that Ruth was a Moabite. Ruth was supposed to be his enemy. She was supposed to be somebody that should not be there, really, according to their culture and their time frame. Certainly not somebody that Boaz, the man that he was in the position that he was, didn't have to talk to. So it's significant because Boaz decides that he's not only going to talk to her, he's going to engage her in conversation, and he's even going to compliment her and tell her that he knows and he sees the good that she's doing. Not only that, he tells her that she needs to stay in his field. He tells her that he knows basically that some of the fields can be dangerous for the women. He knows that some of the men might take advantage of the women. So he specifically makes sure and tells his young men that they are not to touch Ruth. And he specifically tells Ruth that, there is some danger there. However, she's supposed to stay close to his women, and that he's already put a cover of protection over her. So she can stay there and gather all that she needs. He also offers her a drink, something that the young men had gathered the water, so not something that she had to bring herself. He gave her of something that he didn't have to give her, so he offers her a drink. And then furthermore, he offers her to sit and eat what they're eating, sit and eat with the reapers. And it talks about that in chapter 2. So he really does above and beyond for Ruth, and he elevates her to a high position. He tells her that she can continue gleaning in his field. She can continue to gather what she needs to gather so that she and Naomi will have what they need to have. And furthermore, he even tells his men, just leave a little extra for them. So not only are they leaving, the things that they drop, they don't go and pick it up again or whatever, but they're also supposed to leave extra for Ruth to pick up. So he is really above and beyond providing for her, watching out for her, protecting her, especially a woman that he didn't need to do that for. So the story goes along, and Ruth comes home. She has extra food from the food that Boaz provided for her. She gives it to Naomi. It's important to just stop and note here that Naomi really at this point was not in a good place. She really felt like God, was not taking care of her. She uses the word calamity earlier on. When she comes back to Bethlehem, she tells the women there that they shouldn't call her by her name Naomi, but they should call her by a different name, Mara, because that means bitter. Because she says that when I left here, I was full. I had a husband, I had 2 sons, and I'm coming back empty. And so Naomi was really not in a good place at this time. She really felt like she was overlooked by God. She felt like, there was despair. She was not really in a position that she felt that she was prospering or being taken care of. So Ruth comes home with all of this extra food, and it really lightens up Naomi. It really gives her some hope. It really gives her some encouragement. So she starts asking about the day and, what happened and whose field were you in? And she wants all of the details, right? So she and Ruth talk. Ruth gives her all the details. She says that she was in Boaz's field, and Naomi picks up on that right away. And she says that Naomi is actually one of their relatives. So she tells her that, Boaz is actually one of their relatives. And so Boaz is actually a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. And as we talked before, Ruth just happened to be in Boaz's field, right? So Naomi tells her that Boaz is actually one of their distant relatives. But that has significant meaning here, because Naomi tells her that that man is one of our redeemers. So back then, like we talked about before, men generally held the land. Men generally could own things. You know, a woman needed a husband to provide for her. That was in those times and their culture. And God set forth this system, this order to still provide for the women. So basically what would happen is if a woman's husband died, God's law or God's order said that one of the distant relatives needed to redeem her. So one of the distant relatives needed to step in and provide for the woman. So they would marry the woman and they would produce offspring. That way the woman's husband family line could still continue, and the land was supposed to stay in the family line. And so through that, the land could still be passed down generation to generation to the family that it was supposed to belong to. So that's what the redemption system was back then, specifically for the land. So Naomi tells Ruth that actually Boaz is one of our redeemers, meaning he could really help you. He could step in and decide that he's going to take you in and he's going to marry you and he's going to redeem you. And so it talks about the time frame here again. They went at the beginning of the barley harvest, and it says that they stayed, and Ruth continued to glean and gathered the food and everything they need. So Naomi comes up with this great plan that she's going to help her daughter-in-law along, and she's going to help her daughter-in-law become redeemed. And so Naomi tells Ruth that she should wait until Boaz has eaten and drank and is ready to go to sleep for the night. He's down at the threshing floor, which is where they were, you know, harvesting the grain and separating it out and all of that. And so Naomi tells Ruth that after he's had time to eat and drink down there and he's tired, that she should go down and she should just uncover his feet and lay at his feet. Now, this is very odd for us. You know, it's not customary that we would think we'd go in and uncover somebody's feet and lay down at their feet, especially somebody that has been working in the field all day and harvesting and threshing and all of this, right? But Naomi just basically tells her, this is what I want you to do, and Boaz will tell you what to do. So Ruth respects her mother-in-law. She obviously trusts her, which is to Naomi's credit that she's built up trust with Ruth. And so Ruth does what she told her to do. And so she goes in and Boaz is sleeping, and she uncovers his feet and she lays down. So at some point, Boaz wakes up and realizes, oh my gosh, somebody's laying at my feet, as you would expect. And he asks who she is. This is in chapter 3. So she says who she is, that she's Ruth, his servant. And she says something significant. She says that she wants him to spread his wings over her, for you are a redeemer, she says. So spreading his wings over her is a reference to what Boaz had said about Ruth in the previous chapter. So when he was saying that he knew her reputation, he knew that she was a good person, he knew that she was a worthy woman, he uses the phrase of spreading your wings. He says that the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So being under the Lord's wings, of course, gives you this image of provision, protection, abundance, being taken care of. And so Ruth is now using that same phrasing to say to Boaz, spread your wings over me. This can also mean spreading the corners of your garment over me, which Boaz would have known is Ruth saying she wants him to be her redeemer. She wants him to take care of her. She wants him to marry her so that she can be redeemed and taken care of. So Boaz says he wants to do that for her. He says, however, that he knows that there is another redeemer that's first in line. He also praises her for not going after the younger men because Boaz was older than them. And he says, I would like to do what you ask me to do. However, there's one more closer to me in line. And so he says that he doesn't want to do the wrong thing. He doesn't want to take the place of the person that is entitled to seek her hand in marriage first. But he says, I will take care of this in the morning. He says to not let anybody see that she was there that night, which is another way that he's protecting her. And he tells her, I will take care of this in the morning, and I'll get it taken care of, that she doesn't need to worry. It's not going to linger, and if he's able to redeem her, that he will. So Ruth goes home. Boaz then goes to the town gate. Town gates in this time period were very significant because that's where all the business was done. That's where people would hang out. Men in the town would hang out there in case there needed to be any business transactions. Elders would hang out there. It was the place where agreements were made and things were done. So Boaz goes to the town gate. He finds elders there. He asks them to be witnesses for him. And he finds the man that is next in line as the Redeemer. And he talks to the man, and he doesn't start right in with Ruth, but he says, hey, Naomi's selling the land that her husband Elimelech had. Do you want it? You're the closest Redeemer. And the man basically says, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And at this point in the story, when you're reading it, you're kind of like, oh no, because you want Boaz to redeem Ruth, right? But the man says, yeah, I'll take it. And then Boaz just kind of says, oh, by the way, whenever you get the land, Ruth comes with it. And so the man, thinks and is like, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to do that, because he said, I have my own inheritance to watch out for, and he doesn't want it to be split anymore. And if he marries Ruth, part of the inheritance is going to go to Ruth, and then that family line, which would have continued Elimelech's family line. And so he says, you go ahead and redeem it then. I don't want to do that. So Boaz goes and he finds Ruth and Naomi, and he had already the witnesses at the gate that watched them make the covenant to say that, yes, he could be the Redeemer. And so he goes and finds Boaz and Ruth, and he does exactly what he said he was going to do. He marries Ruth. They produce a son. The son's name is Obed. And Naomi goes from a woman being, destitute and kind of left, and she now has her husband's line back, basically. She now is secure with the land. She has her daughter-in-law. She has a new son-in-law, and now she has her grandson. So the women praise Naomi, and they're also excited that now she has this little baby that she herself gets to take care of, and his name was Obed. And then it gives you a little tidbit at the end of the story about the genealogy, and you might wonder, why are these verses even in there? But they're very significant, so I just want to read a couple verses to you. This is at the end of the book of Ruth. So it says, a son has been born to Naomi. He's talking about Obed. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So David, King David of like the Psalms and the Old Testament, powerful king, Bathsheba, all of that, King David. So it says, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz, which we talked about by Rahab. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And that's the end of the book of Ruth. So you might wonder, why is that even there? Like, what does that mean? But if you turn to Matthew 1 in the New Testament, all of those names are in the genealogy of Jesus. So in the genealogy of Jesus, you have Rahab, who had a past of being a prostitute. You had all of these kind of messed up situations. And you get down to Boaz, you get down to Obed, you go down to King David, and then later on you have Jesus. And so it's protected in the lineage. So that's kind of the overview of the book of Ruth. It's a very good story to read. It's a very quick story to read, but I want to pull out what can we learn from it. So specifically, what can you learn from it if you're a single Christian woman, if you're a divorced Christian woman? However, there's tons of things in this book that you can pull out to apply to any circumstance. That's one of the great things about the Bible, is that you can read anything in the Bible and you can use it in your life somewhere. It can speak to you in different ways, in different seasons, and different times of your life. So I want to talk to you just about some of the things that I have pulled out from it, that I have learned from it. So the first thing is, God uses people with messed up paths We've talked about this a little bit. Boaz's mother, Rahab, was formerly a prostitute. We talked about that. You can read about that in Joshua 2, Joshua chapter 6, and then Matthew 1. We talked about Naomi's two sons, both married Moabite women, which they were not supposed to do. We talked about the Moabites had previously refused to help Israel. They had even cursed them. There was a lot of tension. But God worked that out anyways, and God used it anyways. We talked about Ruth coming from a culture where she likely would have been worshiping false gods. She would have been into idol worship. She would have been doing all of the things that her culture was doing. And God used her to be in the lineage of Jesus. And so God valued her, and God made her into a position of importance, and God took care of her. God provided for her, despite what you would think would be done with her culture and everything that they were doing. So no matter your past, God can use it. God can use anybody's past. God can change us. God can bring us out of things that we even put ourselves into sometimes. He can bring out of it, and he can clear up the messes that we've made. He can redeem them. So that's the first thing I want you to see, is that God can use people of any past. The second thing is that God's timing and place are not coincidental. So it says specifically in this book that Ruth and Naomi came at the beginning of the harvest. So this means that they came right as the first harvest were going through, which means that they were going to be able to glean the whole season long. They were finally going to be able to have food. They were finally going to be able to have security. They were finally going to be able to have provision, because God brought them there at the beginning of the harvest. So they were going to have the whole season to harvest. They would have had maximum time to store food. Next, Ruth went to Boaz's field. So of all the fields that she could have gone to, she found herself in Boaz's field. And this is definitely significant. It's definitely showing that God's timing and place are not coincidental. Also, Ruth was there when Boaz came out to the field. So she's out in the field just gleaning. It seems like it's the first day that she was doing this, and Boaz happened to come to the field on that day. And so there's God's timing again. Boaz, the owner of the field, came out. He was able to meet her. He was able to talk to her, find out a little bit about her and her character from his workers. And God used that and the timing of that. Acts 17:26 says, "And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of the dwelling place." So this is saying that God is in control of where we are. He's in control of the timing of our lives. He's in control of where we're living, the places, the boundaries that he's allotted to us. So wherever you are right now in your life, your physical place, your situational place, God is over it. He's working his plans through it. The next part of that verse says that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. So wherever you are, if you are a divorced Christian woman, if you're single, if you're lonely, if you feel like you're discouraged or without hope, or whatever season, whatever place you are in, God is there with you. He wants to be there with you. He wants to provide for you, and he wants you to seek him from where you are. His timing and his places are not coincidental. So then let's focus back on Ruth and Naomi. So what can we learn from them? Ruth was willing to leave everything she knew to follow what she knew to be right. So she was willing to leave her culture, her country, her town, her family, the idols that she had, the foreign gods. She was willing to leave all of that because she knew that she needed to follow Naomi. She knew that she needed to follow the Lord, Yahweh, Naomi's God, and she needed to align herself with him. So we talked about her using the Lord capital letters and how that's significant. That it shows that she believed that God was the God and that she was going to follow him. So we can definitely learn that from Ruth. Naomi treated her daughter-in-laws very well. She wanted what was best for them. She wasn't rude to them. She wasn't mean to them. She wasn't snippy with them. She wanted what was best for them, even if it meant that things would be harder for her. Because if both of her daughter-in-laws would have left and said, yep, we're going back to our country of Moab, Naomi would have been in a really bad place because she would have had to make the journey to Bethlehem alone. And when she got there, she didn't really know what was waiting. She wouldn't have been able to do the work of gleaning in the field. So we can tell that, Naomi really put her daughter-in-laws before herself, before her own well-being. I know a lot of you are going through what's hard for you, hard seasons of maybe loneliness or, like I said before, despair or not knowing what's going on. But I know a lot of you also are choosing what's best for your children, and you're putting aside what you might think is best for you, and you're saying, I'm going to do what's best for my children, even though it's hard for me. And that's commendable. That's to be, praised, that you're willing, like Naomi, to put some things aside and to make some sacrifices, even if it might be harder for you, so that your children can prosper. We also learned that Naomi built trust with her daughter-in-law. She built so much trust with Ruth that Ruth was willing to do something very bold at that time. Ruth respected her and she obeyed her. So Ruth was bold. She was courageous here. Who knows what would have happened when she went to lay at Boaz's feet. And I'm sure she was a little nervous about that and maybe fearful. And, God doesn't call us to, be 100% comfortable and be 100% fearless. He tells us to not fear because he's with us, but he knows that we're still going to have some fear. And he wants us to follow him anyway. So Ruth was bold. Sometimes we're called to work quietly behind the scenes and do something. And sometimes we're called to stand up boldly and do what calls us to do. And so Ruth did that in this story. So let's talk about Boaz, because Boaz is really the most of what I want you to get from this story. This is the most of what I learned from this story as a divorced Christian woman, is from the character of Boaz. So Boaz's character is really what we should be looking for if we're ready to date. So if you're watching this as a divorced Christian woman, if you're watching this in your season of singleness, even if you're married and you're watching this and you have children, these are the types of character traits that we want our children to look for when they're trying to date. So this is the type of man that God would have for us. This is the type of man that we can teach our boys to be. This is the type of man that we can teach our girls to focus on when they're dating. If you're single or divorced, if you're nowhere near ready to date, if the thought of dating you don't want anything to do with that, or if you're ready to date, I still want you to focus on these character traits. And I want you to learn and stand up for the type of man that God would have for you, the type of man that would be worthy enough to have you. So the first thing from Boaz is he was kind and he was respectful. He treated Ruth with utmost kindness and utmost respect. Next, he looked past her past. Everybody has a past. Boaz was willing to look past that past and to see the woman that was standing in front of him and what she was now. He was willing to look past that she was an enemy. Family was important to Boaz. He respected what Ruth had done for her mother-in-law, and he wanted to take care of them both, and that shows that family was important to him. Another trait that Boaz had that we should look for when we're dating is that he was generous with her. He didn't hold things back from her. He let Ruth glean even more than she could have. He sent her home with even more food and even more of the harvest than she could even gather on her own. So he was very generous. He provided for them. He provided food. He provided drink. He provided more than they needed. Boaz believed in the Lord. This is like the number one thing that we should be looking for when we're dating or when our children are dating, that they need to believe in the Lord, that Boaz incorporated that belief in his everyday life. It says in 2:12, it says that he wanted the Lord to reward Ruth for all she had done. And so it's clearly showing that Boaz was a man of God and he was a believer. And not only was he a believer, but he incorporated it into his everyday life. The next character trait that we can learn from Boaz for who God would have for us is that he focused on Ruth's character, not on her outward appearance. This is something that really is hard to do when you're out dating and you're single, and that there's people that are only focused on the outward appearance, and we want to make sure that we are aligning ourselves with somebody that is looking at your character and looking at your heart, and Boaz did that for Ruth. Next, he didn't take what was his. So it tells us in chapter 3, verses 12 to 13 of this book, that he knew that there was another redeemer that was first in line. And he didn't just step into that role of redeemer knowing that it wasn't his to take. He waited until he spoke with that man, until he made sure that that man didn't want to step into that role of redeemer. And so he didn't just take what wasn't his. He didn't take advantage of the situation. He wanted to do things rightly, which is definitely a character trait that we would want to be looking for. Boaz does what he says he's going to do. He keeps his promises. He doesn't let important things wait. It tells us this throughout the book, chapter 3, verse 18, and chapter 4, verse 18. It tells us that Boaz says, I'm going to do this, and then he goes on and does it. He doesn't leave anything waiting, lingering. If he says he's going to do it, he does it. And that's the type of person that we should be looking for when we're looking for a godly mate. He also is forthcoming about his intentions. This is a huge one. He does not leave Ruth with any kind of confusion about what is the state of their relationship. He is very clear. He is very direct. He's upfront. She knows exactly what the plan is. She knows exactly what his intentions are, because he hasn't left anything up to chance or confusion. He's laid it all out for her, that he is clear on what his intentions are. And then he is a redeemer. So he takes what others may not want, what may be stained, what others may not like from somebody's past, what others might deem not to be worthy or not to be good for the taking. He takes all of that and he redeems it, and he says, I will make it right. He also comforts Ruth. So Ruth says in the text that Boaz has comforted her, that just by talking to him, this is when they first met, that she says that he's comforted her. And so we definitely want to be aligning ourselves with somebody that comforts us. And then he speaks kindly to her. We've talked about that. He was kind when he interacted with her, and all the people outside of her that he interacted with, he was always kind. He also gives her a position of honor. We talked about this a little bit, that not only can she drink what the men of the field have drawn to drink, she can also eat with them. In chapter 2, verse 14, it says, so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. So this is a really significant thing you can pull out of this book, that, you know, she was supposed to be in the back of the field. She was supposed to be picking up the leftovers. And Boaz said, no, I'm going to have you eat what we eat what my workers are going to eat, drink what they're eating. And not only are you going to do that, but you're going to sit next to them while you do that. So he raised her to a position of honor. And we would want to be aligning ourselves with people that are doing the same. And then finally, for Boaz, he protects her. He tells her to stay in his field. We talked about this. It would have been dangerous for Ruth, but he tells her to stay close to his young women. He tells her to not go to other fields, to stay, you know, right where she was with his people. He also specifically told the young men that they were not to touch her, that they were not to take advantage of her. He knew of the danger that was in that day and age and that place, and he went to great lengths to protect her from it. So we should be looking for the same. Let's go to Obed then. So Obed, again, is Boaz and Ruth's son. So it says in chapter 4, verse 15, that Obed is a restorer of life and a nourisher. So basically, from Boaz especially, but also from Obed, these are the things that we should be looking for when choosing somebody to date. So if you're single, you have a great opportunity. You don't need to be with somebody that tears you down. You don't need to be with somebody that belittles you. You know, you don't need to meet somebody and find out that they don't seem to respect you at all, or they're very unclear about their intentions with you. You know, you have the opportunity to say no to those types of people and yes to the people that meet those criteria. And you should ask God for sure for wisdom and clarity on the way. No one is gonna be perfect. Nobody's gonna display all these qualities perfectly, but we need to be looking at patterns, and most of all, we need to be looking at character. So you should be looking for a man who is a protector, is a redeemer, who speaks kindly, who's respectful, who wants what's best for you, who's focused on your character, who doesn't take what doesn't belong to him, who doesn't take advantage of situations or people, who is generous, who's forthcoming, who says what he says, who does what he says he will do, who gives you a position of honor and who protects you. These are the type of character traits that God would have for you in the man that God actually has for you. So look for a man that has these qualities. So that brings us actually to the main character of the story. So we've talked about all these characters, but we still haven't gotten to the main one. So the main character of the story is Jesus. His name is not even mentioned here, but it is Jesus. So if you go back through this book and read it, you will see that all of these qualities are pointing to Jesus. That Jesus is kind and respectful. That Jesus looks past our past. He looks back past the things that we've done that maybe we shouldn't have done. He looks past that we were enemies of him, that we didn't want him, that we are sinful. He looks past all of that. Family obviously is important to Jesus. He wants families to be close-knit together. Jesus is generous. He gives us life, it says in the Bible, and he gives it abundantly. It's that generous life that he's giving. Jesus is our provider. He provides us with what we need. Even when we seem like we're lacking, like Naomi was, or like Naomi said she was bitter, he provided for her in that season, even when she was feeling that way. Jesus focuses on our character. He does not focus on our outward appearance. He focuses on our inward hearts, that he wants our hearts to be aligned with him, and he's focusing on our character. Jesus doesn't take what isn't his. He doesn't take advantage of people or situations. He does what he says he will do. He keeps his promises. He's forthcoming. He lays out very clear what he wants from us. He comforts us just like Boaz comforted Ruth. And ultimately, he's a redeemer. He redeems us from our sins. He redeems us from our past. He says that I will take what's broken in you and turn to me, believe in me, and I will make it new. I will make something out of what was broken. I will bring beauty from ashes, that he will restore and he will redeem. And he's our ultimate redeemer if we turn to him and trust that he died on the cross to be our redeemer, to take us from the kingdom of darkness to transfer us to the kingdom of light. So you can look through this whole book and just see that Jesus is in every single word. He's through the whole entire story. So I hope that you learned something from that today. I hope that maybe if you've read Ruth before, I hope maybe you're seeing some of the things with fresh eyes. There's 3 things that I would like you to do. I would like you to read the book today. It's only 4 chapters long, but I would like you to read straight through it instead of stopping and doing something else. Just read through the Book of Ruth, 4 chapters. It will not take you long. So I'd like you to do that. Second, I'd like you to start making a list of the qualities that you want in a mate, if you're a divorced Christian woman or if you're single, and also the qualities that you don't. And I want you to align them with these qualities in Scripture. And if you're watching this and you're married or you're remarried and you're a parent, I want you to kind of have in your mind or make a list, or if your children are old enough to talk to them about what are some of the qualities that they would be looking for or should be looking for. So I want you to do that. Start making a list of the qualities that you do want and qualities that you don't want. And then finally, I would love it if you leave a comment at the bottom of this video on what you love about this story, what God has shown you through this story, what has helped you, and what it has meant to you. So leave a comment on what you got out of it or whatever you want to share about it. So I hope that helps, and you can be sure to watch my other video that I referenced about the name of God, capital letters, Lord, if you'd like after this one.